Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Dwarves and their Grudge system rework in Total War Warhammer 3, Thrones of Decay, patch 5.0. There's been a bunch of discussion on the subject, there's been a bunch of videos, including from myself, and as I've played more and more through Thrones of Decay, I've reached certain conclusions, if you will, or certain perspectives about the system and how it works. Some of the things you have to care about, all of that. First off, I want to begin talking a bit about Dwarf lore. There's perhaps a perception, if you will, that the Dwarves are a passive race in the lore. That's not the case at all. Dwarves get out there, they do things, they fight their enemies on the field of battle. They do have situations in which they do seal their holds, but that's because everything else has failed. Like for instance, when Grimgor showed up near Caracadrin, the Slayers didn't just hide behind their walls. No, they met him in the mountain passes. They met him in the mountains and, well, he kicked their asses because he is Grimgor. But it was only after that, and after exhausting every single option, that they retreated in Caracadrin and effectively sealed the hold, or locked the gates, if you will. And that's how Dwarves work. They go out there, they do grudges. In point of fact, one of the main things to say about Thorgrim's character in the lore is like he has to work really hard to restrain the dwarves from their tendencies, their vengeful, spiteful tendencies. And that's what sets Thorgrim apart as a High King. Like, dwarves are not content to just sit in their mountains and do nothing. As for Total War, well, Creative Assembly did a QA recently, and they were asked about this, and they said that Total War is not really designed for a passive playstyle. Maybe it should be, but certainly Warhammer 3 isn't. And you can say, well, the Wood Elves work like that. Yeah, okay. Out of the races in the lore, the Wood Elves are actually a passive race. The Dwarves are not. Not the Dwarves, not the Chaos Dwarves, not even the Imperial Dwarves, because those exist in the lore, they don't exist in the game, maybe they should. Bit of a different discussion on that subject. But from a lore perspective, okay. What about the gameplay perspective? Well, it's just not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work, if you play passively, you're going to end up being overwhelmed. So that's a bigger discussion, I think. But to people saying, oh, this system is going to force you to be hyper-aggressive, here's what I would reply to that. Yes and no. Like over here, I have a campaign as Malachi. It is turn 20. I failed the first Age of Reckoning, I delayed the second Age of Reckoning, and I've been playing with -10 growth, -1 control, and 50% upkeep. Did it ruin my campaign? No. I think this is one of the misconceptions I would like to clear up. You do not need to fill up this bar every single time. I don't think this bar is designed to be filled up every single time. To fill it up, to get no Grom, you have to really work hard for it. Now, there's a couple of issues with this, namely Chaos giving very few grudges, like Village should not be just 56 grudges, for instance. And Demons being also very few grudges over here, like Scarbrand being 90, come on, CA. So there are certainly some balanced discussions with respect to the system and how many grudges you get from certain factions, like Elves give a lot of grudges. Whereas, though in this case, I don't know if Emmerich has anything, no, because I don't have vision, and he's taken no action against dwarves, or territory that dwarves want. That's kind of, I guess, the thing with Chaos, because they're not necessarily taking a lot of actions against dwarves, and nor do they control territory that the dwarves care about. So that adds grudges. It's either harassing dwarves, or their allies, or harassing, or taking over territory that rightfully belongs to the dwarves. And I think it's also related to the legendary grudges, so that's the reason, the Chaos Dwarves have a bunch of grudges in general, because, yeah, you have a legendary grudge against them. Maybe you should have a legendary grudge against Chaos, but that's a bit of a different discussion. Though, you do have a legendary grudge against Norska. Make of that what you will, and the number of grudges that this provides. So yeah, there's certainly things that I think CA should be looking to perhaps change with respect to Chaos grudges. But you will certainly miss out on growth and control, but again, it's not too bad. And growth-wise, Dwarf growth, for anyone that's worried about that, Dwarf growth has been buffed by quite a bit in the main settlement building. previously it used to be that dwarves had a really bad amount of growth. Right now they're pretty reasonable. They don't have the highest in the game. They're not Bretonia, who has the highest growth of any faction in the game, even higher than Greenskins on their main settlement buildings. But they're certainly in a decent enough spot. They can get to that. That's not really a problem. So look at this as more of a benefit, because I'm pretty certain CA did not balance the dwarves on the campaign based on you filling up this meter every single time. You can if you play right, if you play carefully, if you make the right decisions, but still. What I wanted to showcase over here, however, is what happens when you delay an Age of Reckoning. That's the reason I started this particular campaign. So I got Scruff on the first one. I didn't really bother. Could have gotten probably, the highest tier. But Malachi's campaign in ROC is kind of designed in such a way that it's difficult to get the first one. Delayed the second one. And now let's see what happens when I click that intern button. Village is probably going to attack me. I'm just going to auto-resolve his ass. Okay, that was interesting. That was a lot of troops, though. Well, I got off lightly from all of that, thankfully. So you can delay an Age of Reckoning, and it says it will increase the number of grudges by 20%. Over here, I have got to I now need 8,200 grudges. I also got Ulrika, I'm guessing. Yep.
Ulrika,
so there she is, Ulrika. I was just working on that a bit. And we got some residents around, because why not? Let's just pick that up. And take Village's altar. So now, with the 20% requirement increased, I just need 8,200. That's not unreasonable at all. But this is Realms of Chaos. Things are different in Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires. But you can, do very well in one Age of Reckoning and delay the next if you think. You gotta decide, like, am I gonna do well in the next Age of Reckoning? Am I gonna do poorly? You gotta consider the situation and what you've got on your hands. And yes, I'm moving Garagrim because I got him wounded previously. So those are certainly some considerations you have to be aware of if you are playing a Dwarf campaign. But you can delay an Age of Reckoning, get the benefits from the previous one for 10 turns, then they expire when the new one begins 10 turns later if you delay it. But you're at least not going to suffer the penalty. So that's something you can do. That's something that is available in your campaign. Let's move on to Immortal Empires, and let's talk about some of the issues that exist with it, some of the issues people are encountering, how to avoid those issues, and maybe discuss about some balance changes that Creative Assembly could certainly implement on the subject. I think the system is fine. It's more so tweaking it, really. That would be my perspective on that subject. So over here, turn 31, in my Belagar campaign that I used for his guide, campaign guide in patch 5.0, New Age of Reckoning. How many grudges do I need here? 24,000, which is not really going to be hard at all because, well, you can look to see that Vlad has been a naughty boy over here, so he's got like 6k grudges just with this element in these two armies. Scarsdening has also been a naughty boy, so he's got like a lot of grudges himself over here, and he's taking character peak, so 6,000, 8,000 or so. So auto-resolving this, and you can see that I've already done 10% in a single turn. And that's kind of the thing to understand about grudges. The more you play the campaign, unless you get exceptionally lucky, and what do I mean by that? But unless things are going exceptionally well, not just for you, but for other factions, which, let me state this very clearly, they will not, the vast majority of times. If you think Thorgrim is suddenly going to dominate Skarsnik, that will not happen. I mean, he can hold his own for a reasonable length of time. He's Confederate Barak Var over here, but no. Thorgrim is still typically going to struggle a lot against Skarsnik if not getting wiped out. Karakazul is going to get wiped out, so you're going to encounter a lot of these enemies that are going to gain grudges. If a faction attacks one of your allies, and in particular a Dwarven faction, like the reason Vlad has so many grudges is not because I'm at war with him, it's because he took Zufbar, for instance. The more you're at war with the faction, I think the more grudges you gain, that kind of stuff. So that's how it will look like past turn 20, turn 30. But of course, there are other things to take into consideration in a campaign like this. Quest battles. Grudges are based on vision. So for instance, just toggling Fog of War, if I had vision with Emmerich, all of these grudges that he has over here would be added to the total pool, and a certain percentage of that is the amount of grudges that you need to do for an Age of Reckoning. So if I had Confederated Forgrim, or I Confederated Ungrim, neither of which I can, by the way, I haven't Confederated any faction, but I still can. Well, I can do Ungrim, just barely. But if I Confederate a faction, the grudges that they have, or the grudges that they can see, would be added to pull. So over here for Ungrim, you would have Silver Pinnacle and Skarsnik's Capital, which I can't see over here. So vision is a part of it. What about quest battles? They give you vision. Yeah, but they give you vision in a very limited radius. Typically just the region they're in, or very close region. So quest battles are not necessarily a problem. They also give you a lot of grudges that you complete. So it's like 500 grudges for a quest battle, if I'm not mistaken. So like over here, she'll divine 500 grudges. So they're going to balance themselves out. That is certainly in the short term with regards to that. But let's go over the idea of Confederation. And the idea, and not just Confederation of the Legendary Lords, Confederation of the minor factions. Because this is where you're going to see the problems that people are talking about. This is how you get to ridiculous grudge requirements. Because these minor factions can be confederated fairly early on. You can't confederate a major faction until you've confederated at least one through the Great Book of Grudges. So I can confederate Karakern over here, but if I do so, I will gain all the grudges that they can see, but I can't see. So in this case, it wouldn't actually really affect me. It might be a bit increased, but like we're talking maybe 500 grudges because they have a bit more vision than I used to before. So we're talking here maybe 500,000 grudges added to the pool in this situation when I already have vision with them. If I don't have vision with them, that's when it gets complicated. One particular issue is that when you confederate a faction, a minor faction, you can't confederate a legendary lord because the amount of grudges required, there's no cooldown timer over here for confederation. It's just the requirements of grudges have gone up a lot. So I could have confederated every single one of these before, but now that I confederate the minor faction, I can't do so. I believe that the system that they designed for this is so that you can just confederate one legendary lord after another. If you confederate a legendary lord, you do get a 5-turn cooldown in the book. But if you confederate a minor faction, there's no cooldown added, but you do get the requirement raised substantially. So at the start of campaign, it's 15,000 for one legendary lord. The more grudges they do, the higher it will be. The more factions you confederate, the higher the requirements will be over here. So Ungrim, who was like, what, 20,000, has risen to 36,000. So it's about 15,000 extra added per legendary lord. And I believe the system is just so you do. You can't just chain confederate legendary lords. So you will be able to at one point in your campaign, just not early on. So eventually you will be able to get all these legendary lords and just do one confederation after another and deal with the permanent debuff of confederation, but not as early as you might want. But it is a problem with the minor factions because Bellegarde can get Karakern, and that will obviously add all the grudges they see and also increase the requirements. Forgrim can get Barak Var and Karak Azul. Ungrim can, and also Zufbar. Ungrim can potentially get Zufbar, though relations are pretty bad. And for can for certain get Karak Azul if he wants to. So that's where one of the problems, especially early on, are encountered. Because why wouldn't you confederate Barak Var? Well, there's reasons you wouldn't want to, unrelated to grudges. Because if you confederate Barak Var, one, the AI won't build up all of this. You won't gain their money. The AI won't build up all of the settlement here. So it's actually not quite as beneficial to rush confederation, these minor confederations. I used to believe that it was more beneficial to confederate Karakern, but that's because you got, Thunderers, Quarrelers, all that, basically all these units here. You get them in Bellegarde's army, but now, since you know, Thunderers are a tier 2 unit. You can get a bunch of Grudge throwers regardless. You always have been able to. So now with the changes, I don't think it's worth confederating Karakurt as quickly as possible. Karakazul though, yeah, of course. Like if you're playing Thoric, it's a huge benefit, but you just gotta be careful on this. So let me show what happens if I confederate the faction before this current Age of Reckoning starts. So right now is 24,000. I'm going to confederate. I think I'm going to go for Thoric. Let's see what happens there. So I reloaded my save just before the Age of Reckoning ended, and I can confederate all of them except for Ungrim and Thorgrim. So I can get Malachi, I can get Thoric, I can get Grombrindle. Grombrindle's been wiped out, so he would not really give me that much. Just a very tiny bit, I think, just because of his starting settlement, or his starting settlement province, which has been taken up by Malekith. But all the others are certainly available. Let's go to Thoric. So over here, confederating Thoric, what you can see here, I've gotten some vision. So Casabar has a decent amount, Orion's Camp. I got vision on Misty Mountain, which I didn't have before. So all of these grudges are going to be added to the requirements that I will need to reach for Confederation Lords. But let's end this Age of Reckoning and see how many grudges I am going to be required to get next. I'm just going to disband this particular army just so I don't go bankrupt. Okay. Still will go bankrupt, but all the same. So, end the turn, see what happens. Okay, so Age of Reckoning is beginning. Let's enter a new age, and as we can see, we've gone to 25,600. That is not bad. And bear in mind that there's likely going to be a patch. There's certainly some issues in this version that I'm playing that are not going to be at launch. There's an issue with Gotrek and Felix, for instance. So there's problems. He has stated that they're going to fix them. I'm not sure if they're going to change anything. But what's the problem? Then why are people so complaining about? Why are people showing playthroughs where they get like 40,000 grudge requirements and all that? Well, here's the thing that does happen, and it is a reality.
It shall be done.
The issue that happens, the problem you will encounter is early on in a campaign. Specifically, if you can confederate another dwarf faction or you get vision with factions that have a lot of grudges. That's when things get nasty. That's how you get like people like Battlesby showing like, oh, you may need 20,000 grudges for your second Age of Reckoning, and that's ridiculous. It is ridiculous, I'm not gonna lie. But that's because you confederate the faction, you gain vision, and because of that vision, the grudge requirements have increased substantially. That's how the situation is. So right here, this is my fourth Age of Reckoning, and I'm at 25,000. And I avoided getting as much vision as I could have. So there's cheese you can use where you go in the diplomacy screen and you declare war on very distant factions. This won't hurt you as much as you might think, but if it's with dwarf factions, so let's say you declare war on Queek through a let's say you do a quest battle, you get vision on Queek, you declare war on him from a distant, yeah, that's gonna hurt you. Specifically the declaration of war, not necessarily because you did the quest battle. So it's the early game situation, not so much a problem mid to late game. And again, you don't need to fill up this meter. Like, I filled up this meter in this campaign, but right now I'm fine not necessarily filling it up, right? You don't need to get every single Age of Reckoning done in your campaign. You will be fine if you don't. It's stressing that out. And even if you miss the first ones, okay, you can also delay an Age of Reckoning so that, you know, once you get the benefits, you can delay if you think you're not going to do so great. What I think the Age of Reckoning does, compared to many people who say, oh, it pushes you to be too aggressive and all that. No, it doesn't push you to be aggressive. You won't gain the highest amount of grudges by being hyper aggressive. I could have rushed for the Battlelands in this campaign, and I certainly wouldn't have ended up in a situation of Skarsnik had like was it being right on offer to give me 8k grudges. That's not how that works. I could have rushed for Vlad. He certainly would have given me the thousands and thousands of grudges if I had wiped him out before he took out Zufbar. It's a balancing act. Nice ambush right there. Green skins. So right here in a single turn, I can get like 16, 17, what, 18%. Yeah, 17% of grudges in a single turn right here with just 2 armies, 2 battles. The problem is early game because of division, so you kind of want to leave these dwarven factions alive. You don't want to make military alliances with them. You probably don't want to make military alliances either. Like, you can end up in a lot of trouble if you play foreground and make an alliance with Barak-Var, because then Scrag is going to declare war on Barak-Var, not on you, on Barak-Var. Or Barak-Var, thinking itself it's all strong and mighty because they're allied with you, they'll declare war on Scrag. I've seen that situation. It's silly, and then Scrag shows up and it's like dinner. So it does force you to do certain things that you wouldn't want to do early on, absolutely, but like once you overcome that, far less of a problem. And you can play in many different ways. You can certainly be very aggressive, though keep in mind that does have some downsides because eliminating foes before they build up enough grudges is an issue. We can talk about chaos, early game balancing. I think the system does encourage a much better gameplay style, but yeah, there's certainly some tweaking around with the values, especially early on. How many you require for the first stage and all that, but is it so critical that you get that? Well, I admit, the Grudge Settler army overall, not really that important in the late game, because by the time you get to the late game, a lot of armies will destroy it and can't replenish. Early on, however, not gonna lie, that's a pretty powerful thing. You're gonna have to work for it, though, to get it. Admittedly. Like, I used it over here to annihilate Athaloran, well, to help Belgar annihilate Athaloran. So it can give you advantages. But outside of that early game situation, does work fine. I've stated before, and I'll state again, the meat of a campaign is in the early game. I do think the Grudge system, the Legendary Grudges, Dwarf rework in general, do change that around. Like, you can enjoy longer campaigns with the Dwarves here, but yeah, I think the early game is still where the most critical decisions are going to be made. But you can deal with it in the early game if you're just careful, don't confederate Dwarf factions, don't ally Dwarf factions. For the first 10 turns, like one of the things, and that's the thing to understand, once you finish your first Age of Reckoning, right? And you know how many grudges, like the amount of grudges that you require for an Age of Reckoning are not going to shift. They're not going to change during the Age of Reckoning. So my recommendation to people with this, assuming CA doesn't change anything, my recommendation is don't make alliances, don't make confederations. Quest battles, generally I would say quest battles, you should do them because they give you a lot of grudges that can really help you. But you could delay those as well. Like if you're at 100% grudges for an Age of Reckoning, or you're not there, but you're already, let's say, you know, you're finishing the Garm tier, but you are not going to get the highest tier, even if you do the quest battle, just delay the quest battle by a couple of turns, one turn. Let's say if you're on the final turn, you won't make it, delay a quest battle, do it then, because it will give you a burst of grudges for the next one. That's a bit cheesy, I'm not going to lie. Like, maybe they should consider some things with balancing and all that, because right now you can certainly avoid fighting certain enemies until you know until another Age of Reckoning is, and then just fill up the bar and then cheese it again and again and again. That's a bit of a problem, the cheese that's available there. So maybe that's something they should look into. But there are things you can use to avoid situations where you get like 100,000 grudge requirements or something like that. If you've gotten 100,000 grudge requirements, what that really means is that in an Age of Reckoning, it means that there's so many enemies that you haven't dealt with. But that also means there's a lot of opportunities to get a ridiculous amount of grudges in a single battle, like I did over here. Though I certainly am very far away from 100,000 grudges requirement here. I do like it as a system personally. I would like to hear your opinions on this, but yeah, just the simple thing to understand, it's just the key points. It is not necessary, it is not crucial, it is not going to ruin your campaign if you don't fill up the bar. First point, it gives you advantages, undeniably so. You know what also gives you advantages? Dealing with threats that might not give you so many grudges but are critical threats, like dealing with Skaven Blight. May not give you the most grudges, but dealing with Ikka early on, pretty damn significant. Dealing with Scrag, maybe not the most grudges, not necessarily the best territory, but it helps you out. Dealing with Athaloran, dealing with X, Y, and Z factions, or if you're playing as Grumbrindle, you know, dealing with Valkia may not give you any grudges at all. Balancing issues, but obviously eliminating Valkia before she becomes a mega threat is very worthwhile in a campaign. So those are the things, like, you gotta decide what's important. Is it important to fill up the grudge meter bar and all the benefits it comes to that? Is it important to deal with the critical threat? Is it important to deal with the objectives of your campaign versus the grudges? It is that balancing act that it creates in a campaign. For my part, I like it. I think it certainly changes the way you play a campaign, forces you to do things in a way that you wouldn't think about before, all that kind of stuff. And I do think that's good. Tweaking, absolutely, not undeniably. I think some tweaking and all that. Though, I would say this, I'll just end with this, and I'd say this for things like the Thunder Barge balancing and all that. I really hope that whatever changes CA makes with regards to this, I would hope that they first let people play with this before they make balancing changes. Same with Thunder Barge saying for X unit is OP before it even has come out. Because I'm going to say it as a content creator. Yeah, we play a lot of hours. I've spent well over 120 hours. Do I think I figured everything out in Thrones of Decay? No. Do I think I figured everything out in patch 5.0? Absolutely freaking not. So I think I think even if the balance is not the best at the moment, I really do believe that CA should release it as, well, in a similar fashion, fix some things, Chaos not giving a lot of grudges, for instance, fix some things. But I really think that they should first let people get their hands on stuff and not just tweak things around because people are outraged over what they've seen from other people's playthroughs or because a content creator said it. And I say it as a content creator. That's my view on that. At the moment, I'm not saying Thunder Barges shouldn't be nerfed or anything like that. I'm not saying that the system shouldn't be tweaked or anything like that. I'm just saying get a lot more eyeballs on it first. Because even with all the content creators, there's 100 content creators that have gotten their hands on it at most. Yeah, that's not compared to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that will play it. That's what I would personally say on that. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.